They hovered in orbit, their warship's dark hull blending with the void. The Drelvok, a species forged in blood and conquest, observed the unsuspecting world below. Earth. A backwater planet, untouched by galactic civilization. Primitive. Isolated. Perfect prey. In the command chamber, Warlord Zalvareth watched the data scroll across the display. Reports confirmed what he already knew: this would be easy. Humans were soft. No natural weapons, no enhanced physiology. Just another weak species, like all the others his kind had slaughtered. With a sharp command, the first hunting party deployed. Their dropships descended silently, cutting through the night sky. Clouds parted, revealing the dense, untamed jungle below. The terrain was thick, humid, teeming with lesser creatures. It didn't matter. They had hunted in worse. Zalvaretha's elite warriors touched down, their camouflaged armor shifting to blend with the shadows. Heat scanners activated. The jungle came alive in their vision, a tangle of biological movement, all insignificant. But no humans. The silence was unnatural. Then the first scout vanished. No sound. No struggle. He was simply there one moment, gone the next. The others barely had time to register it before another went missing. No body. No trace. The Drelvok spread out, uneasy now. Their arrogance demanded control. If they were being toyed with, it would be short-lived. But as they moved, the jungle itself seemed to close in around them. The sounds of insects and wildlife masked something else. Something just outside the range of their sensors. Then a scream. Short. Cut off. The squad leader turned, his mandibles clicking in irritation. He activated his communicator. Static. This wasn't right. A low growl echoed through the trees. Not the snarl of some lesser predator, but something deeper. Intentional. Measured. Another Drelvok fell, his throat slit by something unseen. The squad erupted into action, weapons raised, scanning wildly. But there was nothing. Only darkness. The leader took a step back, and his foot found empty air. A hidden pit opened beneath him, and he plunged downward, sharp spikes waiting at the bottom. His comrades watched in frozen disbelief as his impaled form twitched, gurgling out one last breath. Silence. Then, from the shadows, a voice. "You shouldn't have come here." Not a plea. Not a threat. A statement of fact. The remaining hunters fired wildly, plasma rounds lighting up the trees. The jungle absorbed the chaos, their shots hitting nothing but leaves and wood. The ground beneath them shifted. No, not the ground. Nets. Ropes. Traps. One hunter was yanked into the canopy, screaming as the cord around his ankle snapped taut, leaving him dangling upside down. Something sharp and unseen slit his throat before his comrades could even react. Panic set in. Their superior technology meant nothing against an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. A tactical retreat was the only option. But retreat where? One warrior activated his emergency beacon, calling for extraction. He turned to the others, only to find himself alone. His squad was gone. Breathing heavily, he scanned the jungle, his eyes darting in every direction. The voice came again, closer this time. "This is our home." Something moved behind him. He spun, but too late. A blade, silent and precise, slid between the plates of his armor. He dropped without a sound. High above, aboard the warship, Zalvareth leaned forward. His eyes narrowed at the data feed. The strike team was experienced. Elite. Yet they were being erased like common prey. This was not how a hunt was supposed to go. His mandibles tightened. "Deploy reinforcements," he growled. This time, the humans would not be underestimated. The Drelvok deployed reinforcements, a larger squad equipped with advanced scanners and heavier weaponry. This time, the hunt would be controlled. No more surprises. The jungle was no longer an ally to the humans. It was a deadly maze that could be turned against them. They moved cautiously, each step calculated. Their sensors detected heat signatures, a single human, standing still. The squad leader signaled for formation. They were closing in. But as they advanced, the air shifted, the heat signatures became distorted. It was as if the human was moving, but not in the way they expected. Suddenly, the ground exploded. Mines triggered by pressure-sensitive plates tore through the underbrush, sending Dralvok soldiers sprawling, disoriented. The leader barked orders, but the chaos was already spiraling. From the trees above, arrows tipped with something sharp and deadly rained down. Plasma fire returned, but it was aimed not at them, but at their own position, ricocheting off the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint the humans. The Dralvok scanners were overloaded, registering false heat sources everywhere. The jungle was alive with the screams of their comrades. A Dralvok's body fell from a branch, its spine snapped in half, a tripwire cutting through its thick armor like a knife through paper. Another soldier was dragged into the underbrush, his body vanishing into the shadows, only a faint gurgle escaping from his throat. The rest of the squad was fragmented. The leader ordered a regroup, but there was no point. They couldn't find the humans. They couldn't hear them. The jungle was too thick. The environment was too foreign. The Dralvok, whose entire civilization had been built on hunting and the thrill of the chase, were now the prey. And it wasn't just physical fear that gripped them. It was something deeper. Something insidious. The humans had planted fear in their minds, and every step they took forward felt like walking into the unknown, each rustle in the leaves a trap waiting to be sprung. It wasn't just the deadly precision of the attacks that unnerved them, it was the quiet, deliberate strategy. The humans didn't act like prey. They acted like hunters. Then the whispers started. Faint at first, just barely audible. A voice, distant but familiar, in their own language. Words they didn't recognize but understood nonetheless. You are not the hunters. You are the hunted. The squad leader's mandibles clenched in frustration. They had been trained to resist fear, to push past it. But no training had prepared them for this. A scream broke the silence. One of their own was being dragged across the ground by an unseen force, blood staining the soil. The leader turned and fired into the air, hoping to strike something, anything, that might end the madness. But there was nothing. Only the jungle, closing in. They had underestimated their prey. They had been wrong. The leader's voice cracked over the comms. We need to retreat. Now. But there was no response. No backup. No way out. The jungle was no longer a jungle, it was a trap, and they were its victims. And then it happened. A loud crack echoed through the trees. A massive explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The Dralvok warriors were thrown off their feet, their bodies flung backward into trees, their armor failing to protect them from the force. This wasn't a fight. It was a slaughter. When the smoke cleared, only a handful of Dralvok remained. The rest were either incapacitated or dead. The survivors scrambled, desperate to make sense of what had happened, but there was nothing to understand. It was over. One of the survivors turned to the leader, eyes wide with terror. They're hunting us. The leader nodded grimly, his pride shattered. The humans hadn't just resisted, they had turned the hunt into a nightmare. A nightmare that wasn't over yet. Suddenly, the jungle was silent. Too silent. The surviving Dralvok felt it. The trap was closing. The leader's heart pounded. He looked to the skies, praying for the mothership to arrive, to rescue them from this hell. But the faint hum of the engines never came. They were alone. The last sound the Dralvok heard was the whisper, now so loud it shook their bones. You are not alone. You are never alone. And then the jungle erupted. The remaining Dralvok scattered, running blindly into the trees, but the humans had already anticipated their every move. What remained of their squad was slaughtered in seconds. There was no resistance. No chance. The jungle had won. And the humans were its masters. The Dralvok mothership orbited silently above, awaiting confirmation of the successful hunt. But as the hours dragged on, there was no word from the surface. The warlord's patience began to fray. He had expected reports of victory by now, he had expected his forces to return with trophies, bodies of slaughtered humans. Instead, all he received were fragments of panicked transmissions. Lost, regrouping, can't see. Then static. Then silence. Zalvareth clenched his mandibles in frustration. This wasn't just a failed hunt, it was an outright disaster. His best warriors, trained to eliminate entire species, had been reduced to nothing. He demanded answers. Send another team, he ordered, his voice cold, calculated. Full force. Prepared to wipe them from existence. But even as the orders left his lips, a deep, uneasy feeling took root in his gut. He had no idea what was happening below, but something was wrong, something far beyond his understanding. On the jungle floor, the remaining Dralvok soldiers were scattered. They were broken, battered, and paranoid. What had started as a simple hunt had turned into a nightmare. They had been surrounded. Every step forward had led them into traps, false leads, and ambushes. Each skirmish left them weaker than before. They had learned nothing from their previous failures. The jungle had swallowed them whole, and now, even the ground beneath their feet seemed to betray them. A loud crack echoed from the trees. A sudden explosion sent dirt and debris into the air. Yet, no enemy appeared. Just the jungle. The relentless, suffocating jungle. Are we being toyed with? One of the soldiers asked, his voice trembling. Focus, the squad leader snapped. We're not dead yet. We will finish this. But they knew better. They had already failed. What remained was not a hunt, it was a desperate, drawn-out retreat. Every corner they turned, every tree they passed, felt like the grip of death closing in tighter. The remaining Dralvok began to break down psychologically. The constant tension, the fear of what they could not see, had started to warp their perception. They were being hunted. They were not the apex anymore. And then, the whispers returned. It was subtle at first, barely audible, just a faint rustle, like the wind through the leaves. But it was always there, always creeping in, getting closer. You are not the hunters. Their heads snapped around, but there was nothing there. Just trees. Shadows. Nothing they could shoot at. The commander, already shaking with the burden of his failure, heard the voice again, clearer this time. You have no idea what you've stepped into. Panic surged through the squad. They were no longer fighting a visible enemy, they were fighting an idea. Retreat! The squad leader shouted, but there was nowhere to run. Every direction felt wrong. The trees seemed to close in on them, blocking their path. The jungle had become a prison. The Dralvok tried to form ranks, tried to organize, but the humans had already won. They hadn't attacked directly. They hadn't needed to. The humans had turned the jungle into a weapon, a living, breathing extension of themselves. They had woven the land itself into their strategy. The Dralvok were out of their element. They couldn't fight something they didn't understand. Then, the final blow. A hum. A vibration in the air. And before they could react, the ground shook. It was the sound of something massive, something powerful, coming their way. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a weapon. It was a message. The earth itself rose up in defiance. It split open. Trees were uprooted. The Dralvok were scattered by the shockwave. A massive wall of fire surged across the landscape, igniting the jungle in an instant. It was a trap, a final trap. The Dralvok had thought they were in control, but the humans had planned everything. They had anticipated every move. They had made the jungle their ally. And now, they were forced to pay the price. The few survivors watched in horror as the fire consumed their comrades. The warlord soldiers, once so mighty, were nothing but kindling to the humans' unrelenting will. The flames raged on, marking the end of their hunt. As the fire subsided and smoke rose in thick columns, the remaining Dralvok looked around. They were alone. And the worst part was, they weren't even sure if they could escape. There would be no reinforcements. There would be no retreat. The jungle was silent again. And this time, it felt final. The humans had won. And they would never return. Zalvareth watched in stunned disbelief as the last of his forces were eradicated. The Dralvok warriors, once feared across the galaxy, were nothing now, nothing but smoldering corpses and shattered pride. His ships remained in orbit, silent and useless, a reminder of their hubris. He had underestimated the humans. No, it wasn't just that, they had been completely miscalculated. The hunt had been a trap. The humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. His command bridge was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of machinery and the occasional crackle of static. His most trusted advisor stood behind him, an anxious tremor in his voice. "We've lost everything, Warlord." Zalvaritha's mandibles clicked in frustration, but his gaze remained fixed on the screen. The data from the surface showed nothing but dead signals, the last remnants of his forces snuffed out like a candle in the wind. But what shook him more was the realization that the humans had known exactly how this would unfold. They weren't caught off guard, they weren't desperate, they had anticipated every move his warriors made. The humans had been prepared for them. And now they were gone. The warlord turned, his voice low and cold. "Prepare a full retreat. All ships are to return to the homeworld. We leave this planet behind. There is nothing more to gain here." The advisor nodded, though his face betrayed his unease. "And the humans? They won," Zalvarith replied with an icy edge, his gaze hardening. "And now, we make sure they never forget who we are." He turned back to the screen, watching Earth's image flicker across the monitors. For a moment, a flicker of something dark crossed his eyes. Revenge. But as quickly as it came, it was gone, buried under the weight of his failure. He had never been beaten like this. Not in all his years of conquest. But what scared him most wasn't the idea of revenge. It was the fact that humans, these fragile, primitive creatures, had somehow forced him to retreat. In that moment, Zalvarith realized the truth. The Dralvok were no longer the apex predators. The humans had claimed that title for themselves. A long silence filled the command center, broken only by the low hum of distant machinery. The retreat was in motion. The last of the Dralvok ships began their ascent, moving away from Earth's atmosphere, but Zalvarith couldn't tear his eyes from the planet. What he had once seen as a weak, insignificant world was now something far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The humans weren't just surviving, they were evolving. And they were coming for the galaxy next. As the ships disappeared into the vastness of space, Zalvarith knew one thing with certainty. His race had underestimated the humans. And now, it was too late.